Alright guys, so today we're going to spend a little bit of time in the Amazon. Kill me. Today we're going to talk about Amazon, and more specifically the game that pretty much everyone's already covered, New World. So the reason I want to talk about New World is because Amazon's making it, and it's their very first game, so I'm curious to see what they even intend to bring to the table. Also, they're Amazon, so they have a ton of money, and they could probably hit release dates and include features that are promised. That said, the game also has gone through some development changes over the last couple of months, starting out as more of a survival game and now ending up as more of an MMO experience. They even have a release date, and it's this year, so I mean, we really should be paying attention to New World as an MMO now, just in terms of things that we might be able to get our hands on in the next couple of months. The game is set to release in May 2020, and as of right now, you can pre-order the game for $40 on Steam as a one-time purchase, no sub fee or anything like that. There will most likely be a cosmetic cash shop and perhaps some paid DLC in the future, but we're not really sure if that's paid or not. That $40 not only gets you into the game, but they will be doing a beta in April, so spending the $40 now could get you in there, but you might want to hear a little bit about the game before you go spending any of your hard-earned money. As I said, New World was originally marketed as a survival MMO or a survival game. You've probably already played games like it, including Rust, R.I.P, even Minecraft has some similarities with this genre, and for this video I'll be showing footage from Conan Exiles and Atlas, two games that were sort of survival MMOs that I have actually played. These types of games are play how you want in an open sandbox kind of world with very little or no real story. They usually take place on one large map, and in addition to leveling up and spending your skill points, you'll also have to micromanage a series of bars that are basically the survival mechanics in the game. These are things like hunger and thirst, and if you neglect these bars, you will die. In order to get some food, you'll be hunting animals, not only for experience, but for the food consumables that they drop, and you'll need to cook that in order to eat it, otherwise you'll get sick, and it's just a whole thing. All gear is crafted and repaired from materials you gather in the world, and you'll be gathering most of the time you're playing. All the items you're gathering have a weight to them, and you can become overcumbered if you get a little crazy picking stuff up. These games have no classes, but rather use different types of weapons with different attack patterns and higher quality weapons to deal more damage instead of the traditional class system. From my personal experience in games like this, the combat is almost always a little disappointing and could be described as clunky at the very least. Gathering, crafting, and killing enemies all give character XP, giving you some skill points to spend on some skill trees. In these games though, the skill points are mostly used to level up things like crafting, which in turn does get you some better items like armor and gear that will be better than what you have, but don't really change your class as much as unlocking new abilities in a traditional MMO would. Leveling will also get you some attribute points like old school RPGs, and these will allow you to raise some of your base stats, as well as usually one category that's dedicated to the survival aspect of the game. Also pretty common in these sorts of games is some sort of custom base building. You'll be able to place things usually wherever you want, and you can get pretty creative with the overall layout. You can use bases to store your loot and place some different kinds of crafting tables that will be required to make even better gear, but the main reason you'll be building bases is because another big part of these games is open world PvP. And more specifically, it's full loot open world PvP. Whether you're killed by a player or a creature, you will drop all of your gear and your inventory on the ground, and of course if you run back in time, you can pick up everything that you lost, but so can other players. Upon death, you will lose pretty much everything if you can't get back to your corpse in time, but you will maintain all character levels and skill points that you've spent up until that point. To help deal with some of the full loot open world PvP, you can create some guilds, clans, companies, whatever you want to call them, in order to gather up a bunch of players and hopefully defend your base and your loot. The amount of players that you can actually play with in any of these survival games does pretty much depend on the game, but I've seen it as low as 5 and as many as thousands. So why even talk about survival games or survival MMOs as they're usually labeled? Well, New World originally was going to be this sort of game and still pulls a lot of features and systems from games like the ones I've been describing. And not just that, but people talk about New World like it's this crazy new innovative idea, but it's kind of just a copy and paste with Amazon's money backing it. That said, there are still a few things that set New World apart from other kinds of survival games, so let's talk about the things that set it apart, and then we can talk about the rest of New World as it stands and as we know it here today. So the things that set New World apart from other survival games is that instead of the free base building, you get some kind of territory system instead. Territories are specific locations on the map, so you can't just build a base wherever you want, and the bases themselves have predetermined layouts. Just like those bases from other survival games, territories can still be upgraded, offer things like crafting and storage, but can also be claimed by guilds in the game. Also, if a territory is owned by a particular guild, it can tax the other players to use its services for things like crafting and storage. To take claim of a territory, you'll have to fight in an instanced 50v50 PvP siege, and this will likely be fought by guilds, or as New World calls them, companies, and I say that because the maximum size of a company is 50 players. It doesn't matter so much now, but I believe in its original implementation, New World was going to only dump your inventory upon death, which does set it apart from some of those other survival games that force you to drop your gear as well. And while free building is pretty much gone from the game as far as I could tell, it does seem like New World will offer up some kind of player housing. It's yet to be seen whether or not player housing will be instanced or how customizable it'll be, so we'll just have to wait on that information. And while I don't have specifics for you, it does seem like the survival mechanics involved in New World will be mostly toned down. Crafting and gathering are still going to be a large part of the game, but to better facilitate the constant need to gather and craft in the game, you will be able to sell your items on a player auction house, something I haven't seen in other games like it. But just like other survival MMOs or survival games, New World will not have any kind of a class system. Instead, though, they will allow you to gain some proficiency while using a particular weapon. In other words, if you use a sword a lot, you're going to get better at using swords, and there will be a skill tree for every weapon in the game. What those skill trees will unlock is yet to be seen, but this could be a reduced endurance cost, or perhaps unlocking actual abilities similar to an actual MMO experience. Now, as I said, in previous survival style games, I felt like the combat was kind of clunky. It does appear that New World is attempting to replicate some of Dark Souls mechanics and has been compared to that game in a lot of ways. This does include a dodge roll mechanic, which I'm very excited about, but we'll actually have to get in and play the game before we know if it's actually that much better than other games in the same genre. So while these survival MMOs share a lot of the same characteristics, you can see that New World, at least in the early development, was trying to innovate on some of those systems. More recently, we've received some information mostly surrounding some of the PvE style changes that'll be coming into the game, and I'd like to talk about those because this is where the real meat of whether or not you're going to want to play this game is going to come from. So the biggest change in favor of more PvE content is PvP is now opt-in. The game was originally designed to be a big open world PvP fiesta, but it looks like more recently they've decided to tone that stuff down, and now by default you cannot be attacked by other players unless you decide you want to do that. So for those of you guys out there who were worried about the PvP in this game, or you hear me talk about open world PvP in other games that I'm interested in and you kind of shudder and don't want to play those games, it's pretty much dead now and you don't really have to worry about it. They went as far as to say that the criminal system, originally implemented to kind of punish players for taking PKing a little too far, has been deleted from the game altogether. It's no longer required because PvP is sort of a secondary aspect of the game now. And of course, this extends to full loot PvP, which no longer exists in the game, even if you opt in to fight other players. It would also appear that those 50v50 sieges are going to be done on appointment. I don't know if this means that you'll have a certain amount of time to respond to a declaration of war, or if no one can attack you unless you give them consent first. It also looks like instead of just relying on company rivalries, they have split the game into 3 factions that you can join as soon as level 10, and I think this is because the game was described as being pretty zergy in the alpha tests, and so the factions could probably break it up at least into 3 zergs rather than one huge zerg running around the game. As far as the actual PvE content, it does seem like they have a much higher focus on story content, even adding things like questing into the game. There will be some events where monsters will attack your territory, so not only will you have to defend against other players, but it looks like the world will try to take that territory away from you as well. Sadly, it seems that none of this PvE development has gone into dungeons or raids. Instead, I guess we have some world bosses to fight, but I do hope that they at least kind of think about some dungeons or raids in the future development of the game. So at this point, you should have some idea of the game that they're trying to make. Of course, it's still in development for the next couple of months, and there could be even more big reveals along the way. But with what we know now, I'd like to give you my thoughts on the game. Personally, I find these survival mechanics to be very tedious, so I do hope that they kind of move away from that style of gameplay. Survival elements are great to create a sense of realism in video games, but that's just personally something that I do not care about at all. But honestly, as long as it's not like Atlas, I think I'll be okay. Briefly, let me tell you about Atlas if you've never played it before. Basically, that game has a hunger bar, a thirst meter, and 4 vitamin meters. You're surrounded by salt water, so in order to get your thirst meter filled back up, you're going to need to find some fresh water, and then you will of course need to eat to manage your hunger. But in addition to eating to fill up your hunger bar, you also have to eat the right food to fill up one of 4 vitamin tracks. Eating too many or too little of those vitamins will kill you, and it's just a mess, and I hate it. So, as long as it's not like Atlas, I think we'll be okay. I actually really enjoy the crafting and gathering aspects of these kinds of survival games, or especially what New World is going for with the auction house, but the gameplay cannot look like this. While I'm definitely on board for some of this PvE content and the MMO shift that the game appears to be taking, I am not excited when I hear any game talk about focusing on story content. It kind of makes me cringe, and I am hoping that this content is mostly optional or just not a big focus behind the development moving forward. I love the idea of some Dark Souls style combat, but I do hope that they find a way to really refine and polish that combat system before the game comes out. This is coming from Amazon, so I feel like that lack of polish that I'm familiar with in other survival games cannot be present in this game, or people will not take it seriously at all. Not to mention that combat makes up a huge part of gameplay most of the time, and so to have a lackluster combat system is kind of going to be a deal breaker for a lot of people. Now that PvP has been made optional, I do kind of worry that since the alpha revealed that a lot of players just wanted to zerg around, it's going to just be a PvE zerg instead. I don't really mind a PvP zerg as long as you can break it up into a couple of groups, and I think the faction system would probably take care of that. But the idea of running around the world killing trash mobs just does not really excite me all that much. The world bosses sound entertaining and perhaps even fun, but if you get enough players involved, are those world bosses going to scale? And if there are too many players fighting a world boss, it's bound to eventually feel like your contribution is basically meaningless, so I don't know. I don't know what their game plan is for that kind of stuff. To make these changes, I fear PvE might be rushed and ultimately a bit lackluster to make that May 2020 release date. I mean, PvP on its own is a fair amount of content, and it's going to take a whole lot of PvE content to replace it. Fighting other players can be done on loop forever and still remain pretty entertaining, but you can only do some PvE content a few times before it's old hat and you're on to the next thing. For example, a questline is pretty much only good once. A world boss is going to be good as long as it's engaging and perhaps somewhat rewarding. As long as territories give players a great number of benefits for defending against monsters, it'll probably always be something that people will do in the game, but how long will that actually be fun? I really feel for the players who fell in love with the original idea behind New World. I think making PvP opt-in was a bit overkill, considering the game was almost completely designed to be an open world PvP game. Adding something other than PvP is a great idea because even PvP on its own is eventually going to get a bit old, and so it's good to have some PvE or other activities to participate in, but not at the expense of the thing the game was kind of sold on originally. I can't really say if I was more or less likely to play the game because I like PvE and PvP about the same. I do like the idea of a good balanced open world PvP MMO, but it seems like that market just isn't as big as it used to be. Regardless of all of this, I will still be pre-ordering New World and playing it at launch, even if it's just to get front row seats to a bit of a circus. I'm not really cheering for New World to fail or anything like that, but I do think that this launch is going to be a bit rougher than Amazon originally anticipated, even despite the mountains of money at their disposal. Whether or not this is what players want at launch, I do think there's still room for improvement post-launch. Unfortunately, it just seems like that's where a lot of games are going or how things end up playing out. They even made a comment about how they just want to get the game into players' hands so that they can kind of figure out what we want and add that after the fact. So I don't know, is this going to be another pseudo early access style release even from Amazon? You guys will just have to let me know how you feel about that in the comments. If you guys want more New World content as it becomes available, or just updates on the game as things become available to us, let me know in the comments. I'd definitely be down to cover New World. As I said, I will be playing it at launch. But anyway guys, that's pretty much it for me. I just wanted to give you the rundown on New World and see how you guys feel about the game. If you want to hang out sometime and watch me struggle to play video games, you can check me out on stream every Wednesday into Thursday and Friday into Saturday, 12 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you can't actually attend those streams because I play at a ridiculous hour, fear not, because for 2 weeks you can watch those VODs on my Twitch page. If you're curious about whether or not I'll actually be streaming, be sure to follow me on Twitter. That's usually where I give those kinds of updates. The games I play on stream are actually decided by you guys, and if you'd like to participate in one of those polls, you can find them on the community tab of my YouTube page. And lastly, if you guys just want to talk or hang out, I have a Discord. It's kind of quiet, but you could change that if you want to come in there and say some things at me. Anyway, I hope you guys have a great day. Feel free to hit me up in the comments or anywhere else, and I'll see you in the next one.